are you listening to? Straight Talk with Kim and Carolyn.
Welcome to another episode of Straight Talk with Kim and Carolyn. I'm Carolyn.
I'm Kim.
And Kim's running late, just like a good politician. So anyway, that's why she's giggling. But we have on tonight's show, a lot has been going on in the state and I think across the nation where people have been concerned and are increasingly looking for solutions when it comes to energy production and food sources and protecting the supply chain with food sources and ensuring that we as a country, and in some cases, I think in Utah, that we as a state are able to produce what we need as far as food goes and energy goes. Right. And we have two guests on tonight to talk about that.
Well, and I think for me, this was the first time in my lifetime that I ever experienced shortages of anything, really. I do recall the 70s when, there was gasoline sort of rationing and you could only go every other day or whatever. It was the big long lines. But, during COVID, when there was the run on toilet paper, and I'm like, well, these people are going crazy over toilet paper. But now here we are 2 years later, and we're experiencing things like, are there going to be eggs at the store? And we keep hearing about looming shortages. Even the president has come out and talked about, there are going to be shortages. And so, that we are turning our thoughts to what does our food supply look like? And things like that. So.
And I don't want to, many of us do have food storage, but I'll tell you one of the most difficult things to store is protein. And we need to ensure, when I worked for Senator Lee, it became really clear during the pandemic, although I think this is a problem that's gone on for a while. But I had a number of discussions with farmers and ranchers about the processing and packing of meat. And it's a big problem. We have Commissioner Darin Bushman on to talk to us a little bit about that. And then we will hear later in the program from Representative Carl Albrecht, who has some expertise in the energy field and chairs a committee on that. But Commissioner Bushman has been working on ensuring that we have adequate food supply. Well, not adequate food supply, but ensuring that we have, that we're doing things within the state to shore up our protein supply.
Well, and it's become popular and in demand to have more direct farm to table, right? And we're becoming more acquainted with our food sources.
And we're more willing to, I think more people are willing to pay more for that knowledge and understanding of where the food's coming from. I am, certainly. I don't shop for the lowest price anymore. I shop for the local.
Right.
So, thank you for joining us, Commissioner.
Well, thanks for having me on. We started working on a regional growth issue through the 6-county AOG. And we were really focused to begin with on a producer to consumer model. Our objective is really to try and help save family farms, small family farms. It's really difficult these days to survive as a small family farm. The margins are extremely tight and you are competing with these mega corporations. And what they've really done is they've forced producers into very niche markets of products. It's not like we're niching out just on producing beef or niching out on just producing pigs. We're niching out on producing, specific grades of beef and, limousine cattle or, whatever. And so it's become very specific. And then what we've found is that, as you know, and you kind of talked about, roughly 80% of our protein market in the U.S. is controlled by 4 mega corporations. I believe the statistics are 2.5 of those are controlled by foreign entities. So that's a concern. I think that's a concern if we were to ever have to wage war. We have a matter of national security in terms of how do we provide protein. But
so for an example, though, Commissioner, what's happened with the Smithfield plant? Can you just summarize that for our listeners?
Well, so Smithfield has decided that they're going to close the packing operation in California where they process all the hogs that are grown here in Utah. And that affects some producing operations in Arizona And so with that, they're going to end up in a fairly sizable downsizing. And so, we've got a lot of producers that have been invested in that for a long time, have millions of dollars tied up there, and, are looking at their business going away overnight because the mega corporation decided to go a different direction.
But this is a company, Smithfield, this is a company by Americans, for Americans, with the interest of the health of Americans, right?
You wish. Actually, Smithfield is owned by the CPC.
China.
China. Yeah.
Communist Party.
So,
okay.
Yep. The Chinese Communist Party owns Smithfield. So the answer would be no. Some of their obligations will continue to be met, I guess, through shipping hogs to Kansas or somewhere to be processed. But at the end of the day, it's going to have a major effect. We saw the same thing with Norbest, right? Norbest went and they convinced a bunch of growers. I've got a family in my county that jumped in and they put $24 million worth of USDA debt on their back. And then 2 years later, their contracts were canceled and they found themselves holding this debt, right? So our objective is really to help small family farms survive without tying them in with the mega corporations, right? Because we've seen the ill effects of that for producers, and it's not a pretty one, right?
And additionally, I think it's worth noting that one of the problems with these large producers is there is some behavior that looks a little bit monopolistic, and they are squeezing margins to the point where oftentimes the producers are losing money while the processors, again, controlled that market, mostly controlled by 4 large corporations, have record profits. And they can engage in this behavior because they control so much of the market.
You're spot on. The Farm Bureau did kind of a study where they looked at the delta between producer prices and retail consumer prices. It's never been larger in history. So the delta between what producers are getting out of the product and what what consumers are paying for the product at retail has never been larger in history. That's a pure monopolistic behavior. And the Biden administration just settled a monopolistic scenario with one of the meat packers, and I think they slapped him on the wrist for $50 million. It was really a slap on the wrist. It was nothing. So it's a big issue. This monopolistic behavior is a big issue. But long story short, that wasn't our objective to solve either. What we were trying to do is, could we figure out how to put more margin in the pocket of a producer? That's what we were really targeting. And one of the tried and true solutions to that is a producer to consumer model. It is a little bit more difficult. And we have done stuff, if you think back to the 1920s, a traditional family farm, they raised pigs, they raised chickens, they had eggs, they had beef, they had milk, they made butter, right? They did all these things, and they sold their wares or traded their wares for a variety of other things. Now we're very specialized, right? You raise polled Herefords, or you raise limousine cattle, or you raise whatever. And so there has been, we've put a lot of energy into trying to understand people that have been successful with a producer to consumer model. We found a family up by Nampa, Boise, Idaho, called McIntyre Farms, where they grew their business, and don't quote me on the numbers, but I think from about $600,000 a year to like $2 or $3 million a year in a producer to consumer model. And you go, well, that's great for them. They had top line growth, but not only did they have top line growth, they took all of the middle out of it, right? Because they're producing and they're selling at retail. Yeah. And there's a great, as you alluded to, there's a great interest in buying locally produced food, grass finished beef, locally produced eggs and butter, right? You know where your food comes from, what it was fed, where it was processed. Mm-hmm. So we started digging into that, trying to figure out how do we solve that for our producers. And we immediately found and went down the rabbit hole of how do we process product, right? And processing is a major issue. Right now, if you try to get beef or a lamb or hogs processed. It depends on specifically what you want, but you could be looking at a year out that you've got a schedule to get those animals in and be processed. I think the numbers coming out of the Utah Department of Ag and Food was that we could slaughter another 750 beef a day, and we would probably still not be up on top of our consumption in the state of Utah, right? And so we started looking at this. How do we help these producers get stuff processed? Because we can spend a lot of time and a lot of effort putting together websites, helping them create brands, do all these things to develop a producer to consumer farmers market scenario. But if they can't get the beef processed or the lamb processed, or nobody to make sausage or smoked meats or whatever needs to be done, that it doesn't do us any good to have that end of it. And that's the sad part of where they're at right now. The cull cattle market is just dead. I mean, basically right now, because if you think about a processor, you can process cull cattle, which is the old cows that need to be taken out and, they've past their useful life. We usually use that product in processed meats, processed food products, or whatever. These guys almost have to pay people to take the cull cattle, right? And so in some cases, they find it easier to euthanize and dispose of the cattle versus even try and market it, right? And so and that's a result of how tight the processing scenario is right now. So you can't afford to ship them out of state because they're just not worth anything. Value-wise, you can't afford to ship them out of state. So we have tried to figure out how can we do that. And so we focus specifically on the processing piece, and we come across basically three things that are really critical elements to trying to develop somewhere or somehow for people to process and help these processors. And the first one is location. Everybody wants processing. They want meat on the table, but nobody wants that processor in their backyard, right? So it's real estate 101, location, 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 right? So you have to find a location that's accepting of that. So that's been a big issue, right? The second thing that we ran into right away is wastewater processing. Whenever you try to put any sort of processing operation in place, wastewater processing is a huge hurdle. Everybody would love to have a packing operation in their town, but nobody's really out there begging to have 100,000 gallons of wastewater come into their city sewer system, right? It's just not something that they're interested in. And the third thing that we run into was how do you fund an operation like this? Okay, and so banks don't like to lend on processing operations. It's a very unique facility. It's very specialized. I liken it to, if you go to Salt Lake out where they're, got the inland port kind of planned to go, they're standing up these 1 million square foot concrete tip walls. It's a big concrete box, and you can put whatever. It could be a warehouse today, and tomorrow it's a manufacturing plant, and the next day they could be doing bus repairs or whatever. Right. It's a very flexible space. That's not the case with processing operations. If you develop a processing operation for hogs, it's a processing operation for hogs. If you develop a processing operation for beef, it's a beef processing. So, right. And so it's a lot riskier for the lender, right? Yeah. And so, it's not unlike poultry. Like, you'd think a poultry grow out facility would be, you could raise ducks, you could raise chickens, you could raise whatever. It's not the case. All the feeders have to change. The climate control systems are different, all kinds of stuff. So that was the third element that we ran into. So we started trying to figure out how can we solve those issues, right? How can local government help to solve those issues? And then on top of that, how can we get government out of the way? Because all too often, we have these scenarios where it's like, oh yeah, we'd love to have that processing operation. Well, we'll put you into our planning and zoning process, and we'll take you through the conditional use permitting process. And, we should have you an answer in 6
Years
to 9 months.
later.
And so what we've done is we've come up with a concept we think marks, checks in all those boxes. And our desire is to develop a location that is zoned for agri-processing, right? For whether it be a smokehouse, whether it be a rendering operation, whether it be a kill floor, slaughter facility, post-processing facility, and as part of that, we're looking at other agricultural products. Could we do highly compressed hay? Could we do dairy processing? Could we do other things in that realm? All of which have the side effects of nobody really wants to be next door to them.
Right.
And so that's what we're working on. We've got a site in mind. We're not really divulging it at this point just because we don't want to drive real estate prices and water prices through the roof. But we're currently in the middle of a water study to see if we actually even have enough water to pull something like this off. But Commissioner Butters termed it an agri-park, and it's kind of stuck. Our theory is kind of like an industrial park, but an agricultural park, right? And our focus will be to, protect it from residential encroachment, to, provide an opportunity for processors to come in and find themselves, from application to shovel ready in less than a month, and have a scenario where it's actually zoned for this instead of going through conditional use permitting and all the other stuff that comes along typically with these types of things. So the idea would be to get government out of the way of something like this. So
tell me, what do you contemplate as far as land ownership? Would it be government owned, or would you identify this parcel of land and then individuals or individual businesses could come and buy pieces of it? What are you thinking there?
So we've looked at a few different models on it. We're not locked in at this point in time. This has been done in a private-public partnership in the past. So where private partners contractually with public is able to leverage, maybe some EDA funding for infrastructure or some other thing that an individual would not normally be able to come up with, right? Or there's the scenario where, like industrial parks are often done, oftentimes in industrial park, the land is bought by the city, the infrastructure is put in place by the city, and then they basically recoup their costs. It's not really a profit-making venture. It's not intended to compete with private developers.
Maybe
right?
something like even an airport, where the city may build the airport and public funds sustain the airport, but really it's or build the airport, but it's really those users, those companies. It's Delta and
well, I was thinking like a sports stadium, but anyway, go on.
Well, and see, the thing that happens in airports, outside of Salt Lake City, the thing that happens in airports is that all of those people who build hangars, those are all privately owned, right? And usually they're on a 99-year lease or some other scenario, right, where they pay almost a condo fee, if you will, for being there, and they pay their own utilities and services. But yeah, the objective has not really been to compete with private enterprise.
Right.
I know that was one of the conversations we had. It's just not one of the scenarios where we have hordes of people banging down the door going, I want to build a slaughterhouse, right?
Right.
And that kind of is one of the questions. We started the conversation with you describing it as a way to save sort of the small family farm. And so I know I also know you to be a fairly conservative commissioner and policymaker. So I know what your fundamentals are. But, what do you have to say to the people who say, this isn't much different than when the big box stores come in and kind of push the mom and pop out of business, and really what is in a free market, what is the role here? But I got to tell you, my strong feelings on a lot of this is if we think it's been a rough ride to be dependent on foreign energy. I can't imagine our world where we just, we open our refrigerators and stuff is there. We go to the grocery store, stuff is there. But if we were ever dependent on foreign governments for our food, I mean, that's just a very scary thing. And we've kind of come close to that where we have had some supply issues the last 2 years where we're thinking about that more.
Yeah. And Commissioner, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, you're exactly right, Kim. And it bugs me to no end when I go to my local Lynn's and I go in there and all that's on the shelf is Smithfield Farms pork, right? And I'm like, this is all Chinese communist owned product on our shelves. There's not another product on the shelf. That's it. And it doesn't matter whether you want pork chops or you want, country style ribs, you want a pork roast, you want a pork shoulder, you want short ribs, it doesn't matter. It's all Smithfield Farms, right? And so I think it's a real concern. I think it's a very valid point. To address your comment about, big box versus, I guess maybe the one difference we have right now is there is no big box beating down our door to solve this problem. In fact, the big box, I'll call the big box, the four major corporations, they're actually fat, dumb, and happy right now because they're controlling both ends of the spectrum. They're controlling the private producer, what they're paying the producer, and they're controlling what you're paying at the grocery store. So I don't see the big box really banging their door down trying to solve this problem. And frankly, I hate to say it like this, but they could care less whether our family farms exist or not. So.
Yeah. And this is, you mentioned it earlier, but this truly is a security issue for our nation. And I think we need to acknowledge that. I remember having a conversation 5, 6, 7 years ago with a member of the legislature where I had read an article, I think it was in the New York Times, about a lot of foreign dollars that was coming from corrupt government officials overseas and being dumped into our coastal real estate markets. And I asked the question, is there a role in your mind? Is there a role for government in order to protect its citizens against this behavior that is not free market, where money is being, on a broad basis, being stolen from the citizens of corrupt nations where there doesn't exist a free market, where government controls the markets and controls the people? And is there a place in those situations for our government to protect its people so that they aren't priced out of...
I think Texas has just come up with the best solution I've seen.
And we need to talk. And this is 5, 6, 7 years ago. And the response I got from a member of the Utah Legislature was, well, free markets, Carolyn.
Free markets.
No. This is not free markets. We need to understand that.
Captured markets, monopolies, insider trading, price fixing. All of these are economic things that impede a free market. So if we're not working in a free market, then don't claim free market.
Then don't claim free markets. Don't disadvantage those of us playing by the rules by claiming free markets. And in this situation where we have behavior that is very collusive, it does seem, or seems to be, I will say, it does seem that and a federal government that is not taking action to break up what's probably monopolies and monopolistic behavior, then that may be the time for more local governments to step in and protect their people from that type of abusive behavior. So,
yeah, and I think about local government and our role in this, and I do have a very conservative perspective on this, and I'm always asking myself, is this something government should be doing? Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what it is. It's like, is this something government should be doing? Unfortunately, in this particular scenario, I'm faced with, okay, if local government's not doing something, nobody else is doing anything, right? Nobody else is doing anything. And so do we have a desire to be in the development business or whatever you want to call it, right, to do this? No, we don't. Our 6-county association of governments does not. But the same token, the Utah State Legislature has said, we would like to see regional collaborative efforts occurring, in the world of economic development. And that's why, part of the reason that they put together the Rural Counties Grant Program and all of that was to start instead of pushing economic development down from a big state organization, the idea was let's help local government figure out what they need and bring it up to the legislature. That's really what we're trying to do, and that's what we're doing with some of that funding right now, is working through this type of a project. And we believe this project, if it works, and we partnered with the Inland Port, we partner with the Utah Association of Counties. We've got their people on board working with us. We've had the Farm Bureau involved with. We've had just a whole pile of different organizations engaged in this conversation, and multiple counties engaged. We believe if this were to actually happen, it's a game changer for the state of Utah. It's not just a Puite County or a Sevier County or Juab County, game changer. We believe that this could make a massive impact on food safety and security in the state of Utah if we had this type of a facility available to us and this type of infrastructure available to us. And there's been a lot of industry that's been really interested in what we're doing, because they've all beat their head against this wall for 15 years, right? And they're like, oh, wow, this would be amazing if you guys could actually make it easy for us to start building, right? So that's kind of it. So
something to follow.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you for your work on this, especially though for the state of Utah and for your area. We appreciate it, Commissioner.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Yeah, so that'll be very interesting. I think that you've got some of the free market questions are, well, if there was this demand, then why doesn't the private sector just do it? Like, you hear that all the time.
Right.
If there really is free market demand, then the private sector will do it. Well, there are some things that are insurmountable for the private sector sometimes to do. And then if you're hitting up against things like land use ordinances and things like that, there is kind of a role for government to say, what can you do with this land?
We cannot forget, and I'll tell you, this is, to the commissioner's point, I had so many conversations about this where we were all beating our heads against the wall, saying, what is the solution where government is staying in its proper lane? And let me remind you, at the time I was working for somebody in the federal government, which is a totally different ball game. This, for local and or state government, to me makes a whole lot more sense. I think we need to be a lot more careful with federal government because of something called the U.S. Constitution. But there is collusive, monopolistic behavior going on, and a federal government unwilling to take it on.
Right.
And that's executive branch. So, yeah, I love to see problem solvers out there. It's a lot easier to complain, a lot more difficult to actually solve problems. So this will be exciting to watch, the progress. We now have Representative Carl Albrecht, who he'll have a discussion with us about energy. He has experience in the energy industry in Utah, as well as, Kim, what committee is he chair of?
Oh, it has a long name. It is the House Public Utilities, Energy, and Technology Committee, and he also co-chairs the Interim Committee. And that's, for those of you who don't know, that's when the Senate and the House combine together and kind of study things during the off season. Yeah. So he comes with a lot of experience and a lot of insight into our energy policy. And, we, in the last segment, we talked about our food supply and how reliable our food supply is, and really what some of those risks might also be to the food supply. So energy is another close second. We're not really going to cover oil and gas so much, but Representative Albrecht, welcome. and tell us where you represent, and tell us what is the state of energy in Utah.
Well, thank you, Kim. It's good to be with you. I serve District 70, which under redistricting will now include all of Sevier County, all of Puite County, all of Beaver County, and northwest of I-15 in Iron County, Newcastle, Modena, Burrell, and everything west of I-15 in Iron County. So that'll be my new district. I look forward to serving those folks. In fact, I'm going to be in some parades in Beaver County and Puite County this weekend. And my background in the utility business was 40 years with Garcane Energy Association and 23 years as their CEO. So I think I know a little something about energy. I've been the chair of Public Utilities, Energy, and Technology for 4 years now. I co-chair the interim, as you mentioned, Kim, with Senator Hinkins, which is always interesting. And I love the guy. And anyway, you know, you mentioned, you talked about food in your last segment. You know, without energy, we have nothing. We have absolutely nothing. Yeah. People take energy for granted. They flip the switch. Energy is a commodity. Once you flip the switch or turn on your hair dryer or your stove, those power plants have to produce that energy right then, instantaneously. Mm-hmm. That's the law of physics. And fortunately in Utah, a couple of years ago, I revised the state energy policy, which basically said that energy must be reliable, dependable, affordable, and most importantly, dispatchable.
Now, was that an answer to sort of the federal push to deploy more green or more renewable,
less
energy?
Dependable, oftentimes energy?
I mean, were you just getting in front of that?
Wind and solar are intermittent, as you well know, and that's why we need baseload generation. And baseload generation is either oil, gas, coal, or nuclear. And they can dispatch instantaneously. Those others are very intermittent. Mm-hmm. And as you well know, only work when the wind blows and the sun shines. And you know, that it's great. You know, I support all forms of energy, and so did the energy policy, mm-hmm. all of the above approach. And fortunately for Utah, that's helped our situation. We have reasonable rates, which have helped our economy. Businesses have moved to Utah because of low rates. We talked a little bit last night about Smithfield Foods down in Beaver County, and they're paying anywhere from 22 to 30 cents a kilowatt hour in California. In Utah, we're about 8.5.
Nice.
So energy is very important. The new Green New Deal, as you will, Kim, is great if you have an EV and you can get an EV. People need to realize that everything that goes into an EV vehicle is mined.
Yes.
Lithium is mined.
And
cobalt.
I don't think we mine with equipment that runs on solar and wind either.
No.
Right.
Those farmers in the Midwest, when they're cutting their grain or putting up their sorghum or hay on those 10,000 acre farms, they go all night long or all day long, and battery tractors not really technology not there.
Okay, so if you are plugging in your electric vehicle in Utah or California, where is that energy originating?
Right now it's coming from these power plants
that are run on
coal, gas, or oil, or nuclear.
Eek.
Not in Utah nuclear.
Yeah, and
the grid's interconnected.
So
and we're talking about hydrogen at IPP.
Yeah.
Hydrogen's a great source down the road. The technology hasn't caught up with it yet. They're talking about breaking down the water molecule to make hydrogen and using their water rights there at the IPP plant. Now think about it. We're the second driest state in the country. And right now the Sevier River is basically non-existent this year.
Right.
Yuba's about 20%. Otter Creek's about 20%. Paiute is dry. So does it make sense for them to make hydrogen out of water? You can actually make hydrogen cheaper by using coal or natural gas.
Well,
So there's a lot of discussion to be held on that. And they don't even plan on generating with 100% hydrogen until 2045. So you can see the time frames out there a ways.
Yeah, so I know IPP was planning to transition, wasn't it, to gas? Is that still the case at this point?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, they went out of state, Carolyn, to execute a natural gas contract from Wyoming. That really helps our school kids a lot.
Oh, wow.
Good.
Well, I was going to say, is that because of the issues that we have right now because of the moratorium on federal land drilling, or is it unrelated to that?
It's unrelated. They went out of state and bought coal, which under their gentleman's agreement way back when, they broke that. They went out of state. They didn't even give in-state gas suppliers a chance on that. And yet 95% of the power is going to Southern California, mostly
yes, it
LA.
is. Los Angeles.
So what does our energy potential portfolio look like? I mean, we hear these
It's great.
comparisons
We
of
have
what we
plenty-
have under the ground and what is accessible, our access to, coal, which is relatively clean, the natural gas. What does Utah look like in our energy potential?
Utah has plenty of natural gas on public lands, but the Biden administration won't give any leases. We have plenty of coal. There again, new leases for some of these coal mines, federally controlled. We need to develop what do you call that down in Beaver County, the hot water? I just had a memory
Geothermal?
lapse.
Yes.
Geothermal.
Yeah. That's probably the most reliable green power that we have is geothermal. And as we talked about last night, it would be nice if we could turn the corner on nuclear. If you want a total carbon-free industry, nuclear is the way to go.
Yes, so I want to go back to this EV issue with electric automobiles, where I heard an interview on Rod Arquette last week with a member of the state legislature who is really interested in green energy, who mentioned, Rod asked him a question about a transition to green energy. I don't remember if it was automobile specific, but the response that he got was, well, we can't all switch over to electric vehicles overnight. So this won't be like an instant transition, which made me laugh, as though our electric vehicles are powered by the sky as opposed to the coal that actually powers our electric vehicles. And this was in a discussion about getting rid of fossil fuels. And the assumption was that if we all were to switch over to electric vehicles, fossil fuels, their time would be up for use in our cars. And I think that we have a really big problem with a lack of understanding a couple things, like what a grid run with current renewables and current technology would look like, number one. And number two, the fact that some things that people are calling green energy, like electric vehicles or the energy that powers electric vehicles, assuming that that is green energy or renewables. It absolutely is not. And if we were all to drive electric vehicles, I did an analysis of this. No, I did not do an analysis of this. I took somebody else's analysis and then looked at what that would mean for the United States if we were to go even 50% EVs. And I don't remember the numbers, but it literally is something like 4 times the world production of copper just to transition 50% of the U.S., in addition to all of the other chemicals, all of the other elements that would be required to build those vehicles, let alone disposing of them and all of the problems that we'd face that way.
Yeah, and we're starting now to have a real problem in disposal of the solar panels. Some of those have reached their life, and they contain some pretty bad things. You know, I hope these counties that they're locating in have a bond for them to clean that up, because there's some pretty dangerous stuff in those. But getting back to what you said, Carolyn, right now in Utah, 2 to 3% is the saturation of EVs. That's it in the state of Utah. And the other big factor that people don't even think about is the infrastructure in the local communities to put in 7 or 10 chargers that are fast chargers versus
drip.
Drip. And I'll give you a little story. Down to Beaver at the first exit, the service station there has 6 or 7 chargers. Well, on a holiday weekend, the EV folks stop in there to charge up, and it blew the fuse on the power pole, and the power went off. So that's just one example where you've got to build the infrastructure locally to these charging stations, because it takes some capacity in the line. It really does.
Right. You know, it was in the news too last week that all of the Tesla drivers that got notices on their cars, you know, on the dash in California that said, you know, please don't charge your car in the middle of the day because, you know, it sucks from the grid, which is, you know, that high drain time anyway when people have their air conditioners on in their homes. It's the hottest part of the day, things like that. And so there was a little bit of irony that with that is, you know, don't charge your electric vehicle that we've encouraged you and subsidized you to buy for so long. Because we're having grid problems.
We're having grid problems. And the grid at the same time has been weakened by many of these policies.
Right.
Texas and California are 2 good examples. Unfortunately, Kim's native state of Texas, a conservative state, just kind of went hog wild with wind and solar, and then they had that cold spell a couple winters ago, and that was kind of a bad situation. California, it's interesting, they've shut down some nukes, they've shut down some coal, they've shut down some gas, but to keep the lights on this summer, they got permission to add 3 gas plants.
So interesting.
So your bill that you passed a couple years ago would prevent those kinds of things just going too far into the unsustainable and unreliable world of energy sourcing
for Utah.
Kim, that's a good point. In the bill, besides being sustainable, reliable, affordable, and dispatchable, if any of our utilities are buying wind or solar at any given moment, and say we have 110 degrees in the Wasatch Front for a week, they have to have spinning reserves in those base-loaded plants to carry whatever wind or solar they're buying, whatever renewables are coming into their system grid to back it up. So hopefully we don't end up in that situation.
Nice.
And this is one of those times, just one more of those times, when we can appreciate the fact that our Utah state legislators are part-time legislators. This is not something that they do to support their families. In fact, it actually probably takes away from their earning capacity to a great degree. But because they come to the table with a lot of expertise in various areas. And we really are fortunate that we have Representative Albrecht serving in the state legislature. And with the understanding that he has of the importance of energy and the way that all of this works in order to ensure that we as a state are protected from some of these stupid decisions that politicians are making in other states.
Well,
Yes, and we haven't talked about storage. I appreciate those comments, Carolyn. Storage is the real key for renewables, and it has to be, grid integrated storage that will last more than a day, hopefully a week or a month, so that when those peaks and valleys occur, that storage can be released, and technology just has not caught up to it.
Well,
So
Elon Musk is flying to space instead of working on those batteries. That's our real thing. What would you want people to know right now? What's coming up in committee? What are the federal threats that they need to think about when it comes to election time in November, and who's making energy policy for us on the other side of the country, and what's going on in your committee that you would like people to know about?
Well, this next month, August, we're going to talk about storage, so that would be an interesting meeting, and folks can attend in person at the Capitol, or they can get online and get involved and ask questions of those that are testifying before the committee. So that's a good thing. And I might just remind everybody that 80% of the power in the United States comes from either oil, coal, gas, or nuclear. So we have a long way to go. And so elections in November become very important, Carolyn.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I've mentioned this in the past, but I had a conversation with a business person who lives in New York, who has interest in a mine here in Utah, a coal mine. And as he was talking to me about some of the some questions he had and maybe some issues that he was experiencing, that his company was experiencing, he said, I know we all hate coal. Like, he was almost apologetic for even asking for help with regard to a coal mine. And I had to stop him and say, I have to tell you, here in Utah, we understand the necessity of coal. We do. I didn't say this part, but we do have some of the cleanest coal in the world, correct? So much better than a lot that's being pulled up out of the ground in other areas of the world. But it was interesting to me. He has ownership in this mine, but was almost apologizing for providing us with the energy that we need to sustain life in this state, and really to enable us to have the way of life that we've developed in this nation.
Yeah. One thing we haven't talked about briefly is carbon sequestration.
Yeah.
We have some projects in the state of Utah where they're studying how to sequester the carbon that comes out of those plants and put it underground where it won't hurt anybody. There's some projects now in Carbon and Emery counties where we'll be studying that. And, if that proves fruitful, some of these plants could run for a long time.
Nice. So quick question before we let you go. When it comes to carbon sequestration, then we know that carbon dioxide is good for our plants and trees. Does that impact the growth of plants when we bury the carbon in the ground? I've got to tell you, when it comes to carbon sequestration, I know about nothing.
Well, if you want totally free, let's go nuke. But if we want to keep our base loaders running, let's sequester some carbon so that we're abiding by maybe the left's viewpoint to some extent. But let's remember that, and I can't answer that question. I'm not a biologist. But I do know that.
Do you know what a woman is?
When we breathe, we exhale CO2, and the plants love it, and they produce oxygen, and that's it's a wonderful cycle.
The life cycle, yeah. Look at that. Okay,
Which is my plug to not put turf in your yard.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Anyway. Okay. Well, where can people follow you, find out about you? Do you have a social media account? Website?
Mainly Facebook. I tweet once in a while. That's about it. Call me and talk.
The thing is, though, if they want to find out about the things that you're working on at in the legislature, most of your Facebook is grandkids' baseball games. So I'm not sure how helpful that is.
Oh, I like to look at that.
Okay.
Because
Is that a recommendation?
Because they're all cute.
They are cute. No, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I just had to give you a hard time. But they can follow you around the Capitol or into your committee meetings up there as well.
Every time there's an issue on Facebook about coal or power supply, you'll see that I comment.
Nice.
Okay, awesome.
Nice. Okay, so find Representative Carl Albrecht on Facebook if you want to keep up with what's going on in energy policy.
Yes, thank you so much.
Email me or text me. Email or text me. I answer every email and every text.
Okay.
One of the good ones.
He is one of the good ones. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yes.
Have a good evening.
You too.
You too.
Bye-bye. Yeah, we have a lot going on in the state, and I love that our leaders seem to be, not just seem to be, they are in many ways very forward-looking. How do they solve the problems that we are facing currently and that we will be facing down the road? And I really appreciate that about our public officials, many of them.
They're pretty good. And, Carl, Representative Albrecht mentioned this, but it's not his area of expertise, but we'll have somebody on to talk about oil and gas specifically. But he did mention, again, Utah is almost 70% federally controlled.
Yes.
And all of the oil reserves, all the oil shale, we have all of the natural gas he mentioned, any other mining and minerals that rely on a federal lease to access.
Yeah.
And, I don't know anybody that wants to drill on Delicate Arch, but we have, really good and cleaner, comparatively cleaner energy sources. But here's a stat for you that we'll have somebody on to talk about. But under President Obama, there were 80 oil leases on our public lands, and we'll confirm this. But under President Trump, there were 100. With President Biden, there are 0. So even to go from 80 with President Obama to 0. And, that is part of our economy. That is sustainability. It's energy independence, which we had reached under President Trump. We had reached a position of energy independence, even starting to outsource energy to other countries. And now we are giving up our reserves and dependent on Russia.
And I had heard that we have Biden, we all know, trying to get oil from the Middle East. And I had heard that they are actually purchasing now more oil from Russia, marking it up so that they can provide us with what we need. This does not even make sense if you are looking out for the best interests of the citizens of your own nation, period.
Exactly. But let's at least don't do what Texas did and have state public investment in the renewables that were not there when they were needed. Right.
That's right.
So Carl Albrecht did great work there to make sure we don't go nosedive and off of a cliff like Texas and California. So he's done really great work.
Yes.
So thank you again for joining Kim Straight Talk with Kim and Carolyn. And we'd like to thank our producer, Fosmu.
You're welcome.
All right. So much going on right now.
Yeah.
Please find us wherever you get your favorite podcast. Give us a like and a share with your friends, and hope you'll join us next time. Straight Talk with Kim and Carolyn.